You do not fit our brand. Celestine Rourke said it before she opened the final scorecard. Kofi Armand sat across the cream-colored table with 3 handmade boxes, 2 fabric bags, a ribbon sample, a sourcing binder, and a delivery plan that had taken his team 6 months to build. Every number favored his company: lower defect rate, cleaner material trail, faster holiday scale-up, better inspection, stronger long-term cost. But Celestine did not look at the numbers. She looked at Kofi. Then she closed the supplier file with 2 fingers, as if the paper itself had touched something beneath the image of her luxury brand. Imani Cross went still beside him. Helene Savoy, the logistics director, lowered her eyes because she already understood what Celestine had done. Kofi did not raise his voice. Which written criterion did we fail? Celestine smiled. Luxury is not only about product, Mr. Armand. It is about image. The room went silent. Kofi looked at the box she had refused to inspect, then at the woman who believed a brand could be protected by humiliating the people who made it possible. Do you want that reason in the vendor record? Celestine leaned back. 1 hour later, when Maison Aurivel received an operational review notice from the company that controlled its primary Eastern distribution hub, she would learn that the supplier she had rejected was not standing outside luxury. He was holding the route that kept luxury moving. Maison Aurivel liked rooms that made people speak softer. The meeting room on the 32nd floor displayed handbags behind glass, and the words heritage, elegance, and timeless craft on the wall. On the table, Kofi had placed craft that was not pretending. A rigid gift box made by hand, a cotton fabric bag with reinforced seams, a recycled lining that felt richer than the plastic-coated paper Maison Aurivel currently used, a ribbon woven to match the deep blue of their winter collection. Nothing in the samples begged to be accepted. They simply held their shape. Imani opened the presentation. She was operations director at Armand Atelier Supply, and she believed the cleanest way to defend a product was to let the test results breathe. Defect rate across the last 12 production lots, 0.7%. Current Maison Aurivel supplier average, 2.9%. On-time delivery during peak season simulation, 98.4%. Current supplier, 91.2%. Material traceability, full batch level documentation. Labor compliance, verified. Subcontractor transparency, verified. Kofi watched Celestine as Imani spoke. Celestine's face did not change when the numbers improved. It changed only when Imani reached the page titled Community Manufacturing Partnership. Celestine looked at that phrase like a stain. Around the table sat 2 product managers, a finance analyst, and Helene Savoy from logistics. Only Helene had insisted on attending. Celestine had told her the meeting was about packaging aesthetics, not distribution. Helene had answered, "You cannot separate the box from the route it travels." Now Helene watched the samples with professional relief and personal dread. She knew Armand Atelier Supply was good. She also knew Armand Coast Logistics was critical. Imani clicked to the next page. Holiday readiness. We can produce the first 60,000 packaging sets within 6 weeks, then scale to 180,000 across the next 2 waves. Final inspection can be aligned with Harbor Line Distribution Hub inbound windows. At the word Harbor Line, Helene looked at Kofi. He did not look back. Celestine lifted one hand. Before we go further, I want to discuss positioning. Kofi nodded. Of course. Your proposal is technically competent. Imani said. It is also financially stronger. Celestine ignored her. But Maison Aurivel must protect a very specific heritage environment. A product manager glanced at the samples, clearly uncomfortable. Kofi asked, what part of the heritage environment is not served by quality, traceable material, and stronger delivery? Celestine smiled again. It is difficult to explain to suppliers who are new to this level of brand world. Imani closed her laptop halfway. Kofi kept his open. Celestine continued. Our customer expects old-world refinement, quiet elegance, a certain history, a certain visual language. Kofi said, The box has no visible manufacturer name. That is not what I mean. Then what do you mean? Celestine looked at him for a long second. Your story is impressive, but it is a little industrial, a little community-driven, a little too close to logistics. It does not carry the romance our customers associate with us. Kofi let the sentence sit. The finance analyst looked down. The younger product manager, Priya Malin, pressed her pen against the table and said nothing. Helene's face tightened. Kofi asked, Are we here to supply packaging or romance? Celestine answered, At this level, they are the same thing. Imani opened the scorecard fully again. Then the scorecard should show romance as a measurable criterion. Celestine's eyes moved toward Imani. Miss Cross, not everything can be reduced to a spreadsheet. No, Imani said, but rejection should be tied to something other than discomfort. The room froze. Celestine closed the supplier file. The sound was soft. The insult was not. Mr. Armand, your product is good, but you do not fit our brand. Kofi looked at the closed file, then at the untouched sample beside it. Which written criterion did we fail? Celestine said, Brand fit. Please show me the section. It is a senior merchandising judgment. Then write that. Celestine laughed once. I am sorry. Write that we passed the measurable criteria, but were declined because of senior merchandising judgment about brand fit. Helene closed her eyes for 1 second. Celestine said, I do not need to justify Maison Aurivel aesthetic standards to every supplier who wants access to our name. Kofi nodded slowly. There it was. Access. She thought he had come to borrow the shine of her brand. She did not understand that he had built the road beneath it. Kofi touched the edge of the gift box nearest him. His mother had taught him never to let a good seam go unnoticed. Adama Armand had sewn cloth bags in a 2-room apartment near the old port when Kofi was a boy. She checked every seam even when customers paid almost nothing. Kofi once asked why she worked so carefully for people who would never know her name. She said, The person who carries it will feel whether I cared. His father, Jules Armand, worked warehouse nights at Harborline before it was Harborline. Back then it was a tired storage building where workers were treated like replaceable hands. Jules told Kofi that luxury arrived in tissue paper, but traveled on tired backs. Years later, Kofi bought that same warehouse when the old contractor failed. He rebuilt the docks, added temperature controls, installed real security, created clean packing lanes, raised wages, trained supervisors, and renamed it Harborline Distribution Hub. Maison Aurivel became one of its largest clients. Celestine did not know that story. Or she knew only the part that arrived on invoices. Armand Coast Logistics. Inbound handling, boutique routing, temperature-controlled storage, seasonal priority option. To Celestine, it was a vendor code. To Kofi, it was his father's old floor made honest. Back in the meeting room, Celestine reached for a printed sample card. The craftsmanship is respectable, she said. Respectable, Imani repeated the word quietly. Celestine pretended not to hear. But Maison Aurivel has a world. Our suppliers must understand that world without needing us to translate it. Kofi said, You mean they must already look like they belong in it? Celestine's lips tightened. I did not say that. No, you made sure not to. Helene finally spoke. Celestine, may I recommend we pause before final rejection? Logistics should review the harbor line alignment before any decision. Celestine turned to her. This is merchandising. It affects logistics. Everything affects logistics if logistics is allowed to interrupt every brand decision. Helene's face went pale, then controlled. This particular vendor also intersects with a critical route. Celestine waved that away. We can discuss routes later. Kofi understood Helene was trying to prevent something she could not say openly. He did not help Celestine. He helped the record. Kofi asked, will Maison Aurivel provide a written rejection reason by end of business? Celestine said, we will send a standard notice. Please include the vendor scorecard, that is internal. Please include the reason. Brand fit. Please define it. Celestine folded her hands. Mr. Armand, you are making this unnecessarily confrontational. No, I'm making it documentable. Imani slid one clean copy of the scorecard across the table. For your file, it shows Armand Atelier Supply ranked first among the evaluated packaging vendors on measurable criteria. Celestine did not pick it up. Priya looked at the paper. Then, quietly, she said, the samples are the best we have seen. Celestine turned to her. That is not your decision. Priya looks down. Kofi noticed. A person who fears the table can still become a witness if the record gives them somewhere to stand later. Celestine rose. This meeting is concluded. Kofi stood. Imani closed the laptop. Celestine added, I wish you success with brands more aligned to your identity. The sentence landed harder than the first one because it tried to sound generous. Imani looked at Kofi. For the first time, anger moved across her face. Kofi only picked up the box nearest him. He left the other samples on the table. Celestine noticed. You forgot these. No, Kofi said. Keep them. Why? Because when your current supplier misses holiday readiness, you will need to remember what quality looked like before Image rejected it. Celestine gave a thin smile. We are not worried about our current supplier. Helene whispered, You should be. Celestine ignored her. Kofi turned to the door. One more thing. Celestine looked annoyed. Brennan Locke should be included in the rejection notice. The Chief Executive Officer? Celestine asked. Yes. This is not a Chief Executive Officer matter. Kofi looked at the unopened scorecard, the samples, the product managers, Helene, and finally Celestine. It will be. He walked out with Imani. The door closed behind them. For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. Then Celestine said, That was theatrical. Helene stood. No, it was controlled. Celestine narrowed her eyes. What exactly are you implying? I am saying you should have let logistics explain before you humiliated him. He is a packaging supplier. Helene shook her head. He is Kofi Armand. Celestine stared. Founder of Armand Atelier Supply. Yes, we read the briefing. And founder of Armand Coast Logistics. The finance analyst looked up. Celestine did not react at first. Helene continued. Armand Coast operates Harborline Distribution Hub. Celestine's smile faded. Our Harborline. The hub that handles nearly half our eastern region volume, Helene said. Boutique replenishment, seasonal inventory, online high-value orders, perfume temperature control, holiday packing overflow. Celestine sat back down. That cannot be the same Armand. It is the same Armand. Priya looked from Helene to the closed file. Celestine said, Why was that not in the meeting brief? Helene answered, It was. Page 4, Operational Relationships. Celestine opened the brief. Her fingers moved faster now. Page 4. Armand Coast Logistics, Harbor Line Distribution Hub Operator. Existing Maison Aurivel Distribution Partner. Seasonal Priority Renewal Pending. Celestine read it once, then again. Her face changed, but pride moved faster than fear. Logistics relationships do not dictate merchandising decisions. Helene said, not unless merchandising decisions trigger logistics contract review. Celestine looked up. What review? Helene's voice lowered. COFI contracts are not ordinary warehouse contracts. Harbor Line has ethical partnership terms, non-discrimination language, vendor fairness provisions, good standing requirements for seasonal priority. Celestine closed the file. He would not threaten distribution over a packaging meeting. Helene said, he does not need to threaten. The contract can be triggered by the record. In the elevator, Imani did not speak until the doors closed. Then she said, she passed on every number and still rejected us. Yes, she did not even pretend well. No. Imani looked at Kofi's reflection in the elevator wall. You are going to call Valeria. Already did. Imani glanced down. Kofi's phone was still connected through an open legal line, muted. Valeria Quinn's voice came through when Kofi tapped the screen. I heard enough, she said. Imani's eyes widened. Kofi said, begin ethical partnership review notice. Preserve meeting record, vendor scorecard, all notes and communications involving brand fit. Include Brennan Locke, Helene Savoy, and legal. Valeria asked, immediate operational actions. Do not halt current shipments. Store staff and customers did nothing wrong. Seasonal priority. Pause expansion approval and priority upgrade pending review. Lease extension. Pause negotiation. Vendor rejection. Request written criteria by 5 in the afternoon. Valeria said, understood. Imani stared at him as the elevator descended. You knew she might do this. Kofi said, I knew the product was strong enough that a fair rejection would need a real reason, and an unfair one would create the record. He nodded. Imani looked at the sample box under his arm. Your mother would have hated that room. My mother worked in rooms that never invited her to sit. That is why I sat down. The elevator opened to the lobby. Employees moved around them with shopping bags, perfume samples, security badges, and the calm of people who did not know a major distribution artery had just begun to tighten. Kofi did not look back at the marble. He had seen enough marble in buildings where workers entered through loading docks. Inside Maison Aurivel, Celestine tried to regain control the only way she understood. She changed the language. She opened the rejection draft and deleted not aligned with our vendor criteria, because the scorecard would make that false. She typed, not selected at this time due to strategic positioning. Paused. The words were cleaner. They were also weaker. She typed again. Maison Aurivel has determined that Armand Atelier Supply does not align with the current brand universe for the winter collection. Helene stood in the doorway. Do not send that. Celestine did not turn. This is my decision. It is also a document. Celestine looked over her shoulder. You are overstepping. Helene stepped inside. No, I am trying to keep your bias from becoming an operational crisis. Celestine stood. You do not get to accuse me of bias because I protect luxury standards. Helene said, I am accusing you of ignoring the scorecard, ignoring logistics, ignoring the contract, and using brand universe because you know you cannot write what you mean. Celestine's face tightened. Leave my office. Helene did not move. If you send that without legal review, I will forward the meeting concern to Brennan. Celestine's voice dropped. You would go around me. Helene said, I should have gone around you before the meeting. Priya appeared behind Helene. She held the copy of the scorecard Imani had left behind. I also think the rejection should be reviewed, Priya said. Celestine stared at her. You are a product manager, not legal. Priya's hands shook, but she kept holding the paper. The product was better. The scorecard says it. If we reject them, we should be able to say why. Celestine looked at both women. Get out. They left. Celestine sat down and hit send. At 3:12 in the afternoon, the rejection email left her office. At 3:14, Valeria Quinn received it. At 3:19, the ethical partnership review notice went to Maison Oravel North America leadership. At 3:22, Brennan Locke assistant marked the message urgent. At 3:29, Helene's phone rang. Brennan Locke's voice was controlled. Helene, tell me why Armand Coast Logistics just froze our seasonal priority expansion. Helene looked through the glass at Celestine's office. Because Celestine rejected Kofi Armand as a supplier after he scored first on measurable criteria. Brennan said, that does not explain the logistics action. Helene answered, it does if you heard what she said. Silence. Then Brennan asked, what did she say? Helene looked at Priya, who stood beside her with the scorecard still in hand. You do not fit our brand. Brennan did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, bring me the file. All of it. And Celestine. Helene asked, now? Brennan's voice hardened. Now. At 4:01, Celestine walked into the Chief Executive Officer conference room, still believing she could manage the narrative. At 4:02, she saw the Harbor Line lease file open on the table. At 4:03, she saw the vendor's scorecard beside it. At 4:04, Brennan Locke looked up and asked the question she had not prepared to hear. Celestine, why did we reject the supplier who controls the hub that moves our Eastern region business? The room went quiet. For the first time that day, the closed file was not in Celestine's hand. It was open in front of everyone else. Celestine Rourke looked at the vendor scorecard, then at the Harbor Line lease file, then at Brennan Locke. For the first time that afternoon, she did not have the advantage of a closed folder. Brennan was the Chief Executive Officer of Maison Oravel North America. He had built his reputation on keeping luxury calm under pressure, so he did not raise his voice when he asked the question again. Why did we reject the supplier who controls the hub that moves our Eastern region business? Celestine sat down carefully. We did not reject Armand Coast Logistics. We declined Armand Atelier Supply for packaging alignment. Brennan turned one page. Same founder, same ownership group, same ethical partnership framework. Helene Savoy spoke from the far side of the table. And the same Harbor Line relationship. Brennan tapped the lease file. Harbor Line handles New York boutique replenishment, Boston seasonal inventory, Philadelphia returns, online high-value orders, and temperature-controlled perfume storage. Yes, Helene said. How much? Eastern region volume. 47% by unit count last quarter, higher by value during holiday period. And our seasonal priority upgrade, pending signature. Warehouse expansion, pending. Additional packing lanes, pending. Brennan leaned back. So the same person we told did not fit our brand is the person we are asking for more space, more priority, and more labor before holiday season. Celestine said, we did not tell him he did not fit our brand because of him personally. Priya Malin looked down at the scorecard. Brennan noticed. Priya, you were in the room. What did you hear? Priya lifted her eyes. Kofi Armand asked which written criterion failed. Celestine said, brand fit. Imani Cross asked where that criterion appeared on the scorecard. Celestine said not everything can be reduced to a spreadsheet. Brennan nodded. And the samples, the best we have seen. Celestine turned. "That is your opinion." Priya's voice shook, but it did not break. "It is also reflected in the quality notes." Brennan opened the scorecard. Armand Atelier Supply ranked first in defect rate, production scalability, material traceability, inspection process, and long-term cost stability. He looked at Celestine. "What did they rank last in?" Celestine said, "This conversation is missing the nuance of luxury positioning." Brennan said, "Then give me the nuance in words that can survive being written down." No one moved. That was the problem. Celestine brand language sounded elegant in private. It became smaller when asked to become a record. At the same time, 26 miles away, Kofi Armand stepped onto the floor of Harbor Line Distribution Hub. Forklifts moved in clean lanes. Workers scanned sealed cases. Cooling monitors glowed above perfume storage. Boutique shipments were arranged by route, value, and handling requirement. Kofi stopped near the old south wall. Most visitors never noticed it. The brick there was darker because Kofi had refused to replace that section during renovation. His father had worked beside that wall for 19 years when Harbor Line was still a neglected warehouse under another company name. Jules Armand had lifted cartons for brands that never learned his name. He had come home with sore shoulders and stories about fragile goods treated better than tired workers. One night, when Kofi was 14, he watched a supervisor shout at a man for dropping a box of silk scarves. The scarves were checked immediately. The worker hand was bleeding, but no one asked about it. Jules walked his son away from the dock and said one sentence Kofi never forgot. Nobody taught them that the hand is part of the product. His mother taught him the same truth from another side. Adama Armand sewed fabric bags under a small lamp. When Kofi asked why she cared so much, she said, "The person who carries it will feel whether I cared." Between his father Doc and his mother sewing table, Kofi learned that a product is made at every handoff. That belief built Armand Atelier Supply. It began with 8 workers, 2 sewing machines, a paper cutter that jammed when the humidity changed, and orders from small boutiques that wanted packaging with dignity. Imani Cross joined after leaving a large packaging firm where beautiful brochures hid terrible subcontracting. When she first visited Kofi's workshop, she asked for material origin, wage policy, waste tracking, defect logs, and rejected samples. Kofi gave her all of it. Then she asked why he wanted to make luxury packaging in a place luxury brands did not want to admit existed. Kofi answered, "Because they already use the hands from places like this. I want the ownership to catch up." Imani accepted the job that day. Together, they built Armand Atelier Supply on batch records, fair wage certifications, low toxicity ink, labor review, stitch testing, moisture testing, corner crush testing, and holiday surge planning. Not romance, proof. Kofi did not want Maison Aureville because he needed its name. He wanted the contract because a major brand using ethical packaging openly could move the standard for everyone beneath it. That was what Celestine had not understood. She thought he wanted permission to stand near luxury. He wanted luxury to stop lying about who made it possible. Maurice Clay approached from the inspection lane. He had worked with Jules Armand before Kofi bought Harbor Line, and he had been the first operations manager Kofi hired after renovation. "You heard from the tower?" Maurice asked. Kofi nodded. "They are opening the file." Maurice looked toward the Maison Aureville outbound section. About time someone opened something. Imani arrived beside them with her laptop under one arm. "Valeria sent the preservation notice. Good. No shipment holds yet." "No." Maurice looked surprised. "You are not stopping their trucks?" "Not today, after what she said." Warehouse staff did not say it. Boutique employees did not say it. Customers waiting on orders did not say it. Drivers on night routes did not say it. Maurice studied him. "Your father would have liked that answer." Kofi looked at the dark brick wall. He would have asked what took me so long to own the dock. Morris laughed softly, then his face changed. Kofi, be careful. People like Celestine do not lose power by admitting the first truth. They try to create a second story. Imani said, she already started. Rejection email says brand universe. Morris shook his head. Brand universe. That is a fancy locked door. Back at Maison Aurivel, the second story had begun. Celestine stood at the screen, presenting her decision as if format could restore authority. Armand Atelier Supply is operationally impressive, she said, but Maison Aurivel must protect coherence across all customer-facing touchpoints. Their manufacturing story draws attention to labor, logistics, community origin, and industrial revitalization. Those are admirable, but they do not align with the aspirational heritage frame. Brennan looked tired. So the concern is that customers might learn who made the box? Celestine stiffened. That is not what I said. Helene said, it is what the sentence does. Imani voice entered from the conference speaker. Then please provide the written supplier criteria. Everyone looked toward the phone. Brennan had approved Valeria's request to include Kofi team in the fact review. Celestine had not realized the line was active. Valeria Quinn spoke next. Armand Atelier Supply requests the final vendor scorecard, the rejection rationale, all written brand fit criteria, and communications referring to identity, heritage alignment, visual story, customer expectation, community manufacturing, or brand universe. Celestine said, that is overly broad. Valeria replied, so was the phrase brand universe. Kofi did not speak yet. He was in a small conference room inside Harborline, seated beside Imani, Morris, and Valeria on video. Behind him, through the glass, Maison Aurivel shipments were still being packed. Brennan noticed. Are those our outbound cases behind you? Kofi said, yes. You are still moving our goods? Correct. Even after the review notice? Correct. Why? Because review is not revenge. It is a process. Your stores should not be punished before your leadership is examined. Brennan absorbed that. Valeria continued. Armand Coast Logistics has paused only 3 pending items: expansion approval, seasonal priority upgrade, and lease extension negotiation. Current contracted service remains active as long as Maison Aurivel complies with preservation and review obligations. Brennan asked, what triggered the pause? Potential violation of ethical partnership standards, non-discrimination obligations in supplier interaction, and conduct that may create reputational harm to the hub by using exclusionary criteria while relying on Armand infrastructure. Celestine said, that is absurd. Kofi finally spoke. It is not absurd to ask whether a brand can use our logistics network to advertise ethical luxury while rejecting our qualified manufacturing team for reasons it cannot define. Celestine said, you are conflating 2 businesses. No, you separated them only when one had power over you. The room went still. Kofi continued, when Armand Coast moves your handbags, our people are invisible enough for you. When Armand Atelier asks to make the packaging, suddenly our story is too visible. Brennan looked down at the file. That sentence did not accuse the brand with anger. It described the machine too accurately to dismiss. Helene opened the operational dependency report. If Harborline seasonal priority is not approved, Maison Aurivel loses first position on 2 holiday packing lanes, early morning dock access on high-value routes, and overflow access for temperature-controlled perfume inventory. Brennan asked, can we replace those options elsewhere? Not before holiday season, Celestine said. There are other logistics providers. Helene said, not with bonded high-value handling, perfume temperature stability, boutique routing, returns processing, and available holiday capacity inside our current lane map. Brennan looked at the numbers. Delay impact, 3 weeks minimum if we migrate major volume now, possibly 5. Higher damage risk, higher cost, lower visibility. Finance Director Nolan Pierce spoke for the first time. Revenue exposure. Helene said, in a severe disruption, hundreds of millions in seasonal sell-through risk across the eastern region. The sentence changed the temperature in the room. Celestine had rejected a supplier because she believed he did not fit the image. Now, the image had a price. Kofi spoke from Harbor Line. We are not here to threaten that outcome. We are here to prevent the thinking that makes it possible. Brennan asked, what do you want? Valeria answered, preservation first, then review of the vendor process. No deletion of notes, no rewriting of scorecards. No retaliation against witnesses. No pressure on logistics to minimize operational dependency. No public statement implying Armand failed quality standards. Celestine said, you cannot dictate our internal review. Kofi said, I can dictate the conditions under which my company extends more capacity to yours. Brennan sat back. That was the first moment Celestine understood her authority had limits outside the room she controlled. A supervisor knocked on the Harbor Line conference glass and entered. Mr. Armand, the Maison Aureville southbound fragrance pallets are ready, temperature readings are stable, but lane 3 has a sensor variance. Kofi stood. Excuse me. Celestine stared at the screen. We are in the middle of a critical discussion. Kofi looked at her. Your freight is in the middle of an actual operation. He left the conference room. The camera stayed on as he walked onto the floor with Morris. Everyone in the Maison Aureville room watched the man Celestine had reduced to brand fit inspect the movement of their goods with more care than their own leadership had given his scorecard. Kofi checked the sensor reading. Lane 3 humidity spike lasted how long? 4 minutes. Product type. Leather small goods. Move to lane 5 for inspection before release. Log the variance. Notify Helene team. No shipment leaves until packaging integrity is confirmed. Morris nodded. Kofi turned to a worker holding a scanner. Did anyone rush you because this was priority freight? No, sir. If they do, send it to Morris and me. Yes, sir. Celestine watched in silence. The worker was not afraid of Kofi. They were accountable to him. There was a difference. Kofi returned to the conference room. That is why Harbor Line exists, he said. We do not let expensive goods move faster than the truth about their condition. Brennan glanced at Celestine. Perhaps we should apply that rule to the vendor record. Celestine's face tightened. Brennan asked Priya to read the supplier ranking aloud. Priya took the scorecard. Overall measurable criteria. Armand Atelier Supply ranked first. Current supplier, Bellamont House Packaging, ranked third. Defect rate. Armand Atelier, 0.7%. Bellamont House, 2.8%. Traceable materials. Armand Atelier, full batch documentation. Bellamont House, partial documentation. Holiday scale readiness. Armand Atelier, 6-week ramp confirmed. Bellamont House, 10-week ramp with subcontractor dependency. Labor compliance. Armand Atelier, verified. Bellamont House, pending renewal. Celestine interrupted. Bellamont has heritage. Brennan said, heritage is not a substitute for adhesive that fails in humidity. Priya continued. Return complaints tied to packaging damage were higher for Bellamont shipments over the last 2 quarters. Celestine said, those are isolated. Imani said, the defect reports cluster around glue failure, corner crush, and moisture exposure. Nolan from finance asked, why did we keep Bellamont? Celestine answered too quickly. They understand our customer. Kofi looked at her. Do they understand your product? Silence. Valeria said, please note the question. Brennan turned to Helene. Did logistics raise concerns about Bellamont? Yes, twice last quarter. Who received the concerns? Merchandising vendor team. Celestine said, they were not material. Helene answered, they became material when we were asked to expand holiday volume through the same supplier. Brennan asked, why was I not briefed? Because the issues were being managed, Celestine said. Kofi said, managed or hidden under brand continuity. She looked at him with open anger. You are enjoying this. No, his answer was immediate. My father moved luxury goods on a warehouse floor where broken workers were easier to replace than broken boxes. My mother sewed bags for stores that never cared who made them. I built companies so craft, labor, and logistics could stand in the same room as brand. I am not enjoying the fact that your brand needed a crisis to look at the people holding it up. No one spoke. Brennan asked quietly, what would a fair review look like? Kofi answered, start by admitting that the written criteria were not the criteria used. Celestine said, I will not accept that. Kofi looked at Brennan, not her. Then the review will find it without her acceptance. Valeria said, we will require all notes from the meeting, including handwritten notes from product team, logistics observations, the original scorecard, the rejection draft history, and any communications with Bellamont regarding renewal. Celestine's eyes moved slightly. Kofi saw it. So did Valeria. Valeria asked, has Bellamont been notified of this process? Celestine said, not by me. Brennan looked at her. That is not what she asked. Celestine hesitated. I informed them that the winter packaging direction remains under review. When? This morning, before the Armand meeting, yes. Imani looked at Kofi. Valeria said, please preserve that communication as well. Brennan's tone hardened. Celestine, did you enter the Armand meeting after already signaling to Bellamont that they would likely remain? Celestine said, we maintain ongoing vendor relationships. Did you? She did not answer. The open loop Kofi had suspected began to take shape. The rejection had not only been bias, it may have been predetermined. Morris whispered, there it is. Kofi nodded once. Celestine had closed the file because she did not want the numbers to disturb a decision she had already made. Brennan stood. This review is now formal. Celestine, you are removed from communications with Bellamont and Armand pending review. Helene will provide logistics impact. Priya will provide product quality notes. Nolan will provide cost and risk exposure. Legal will coordinate with Valeria. Celestine said, you are overreacting. Brennan replied, no, I am reacting late. That sentence changed the room more than anger would have. Kofi watched Brennan carefully. Late honesty could still matter if it produced early repair, but it could also become another brand strategy. He would wait for evidence. At 5:12, Maison Aurivel received the formal review checklist from Valeria. At 5:17, Harborline froze seasonal priority expansion in the contract portal. At 5:25, Bellamont House Packaging sent Celestine a message. Are we still protected for winter? The message appeared in the preservation capture. Brennan read it aloud. Are we still protected? Celestine's face went white. Kofi did not speak. He did not need to. The supplier file Celestine had closed was now only one part of the story. Another file had opened, and this one had her fingerprints on it. By morning, Maison Aurivel had to decide whether it wanted to protect Celestine Rourke or protect the brand she had nearly stranded in its own boxes. The emergency procurement and logistics review began at 8:05. Brennan Locke did not open with a speech about reputation. He opened with the captured message Celestine had sent after being ordered not to contact Bellamont. Do not send anything else. Delete informal language. The sentence sat on the screen above the conference table. Not as rumor, not as interpretation, as a preserved communication. Celestine sat with counsel to her right. Helene Savoy sat across from her with the Harbor Line dependency file. Priya Malin sat beside the product quality report. Nolan Pierce had the revenue exposure model open. Kofi Armand joined by video from Harbor Line Distribution Hub with Imani Cross, Morris Clay, and Valeria Quinn. Behind Kofi, Maison Oravel Freight was still moving. That mattered. Kofi had not shut the door. He had only stopped holding it open for free. Brennan looked at Celestine. You were instructed not to contact Bellamont. My message was intended to prevent confusion by telling them to delete informal language. Celestine said, It was poor wording. Valeria answered, Poor wording does not usually request deletion. Brennan turned to the legal director. Show the 6-month Bellamont thread. A sequence opened on the screen. Bellamont House Packaging. We can adjust the sustainability language as needed. Our heritage story remains cleaner for your customer than the newer community manufacturing pitch. Celestine Rourke. Stay patient. The other review is necessary optics. Bellamont House Packaging. Understood. We appreciate being protected while formalities conclude. The room went very still. Necessary optics, formalities, protected. 3 words that did more damage than any accusation Kofi could have made. Imani looked at Celestine through the screen. We spent 6 months preparing samples, sourcing files, labor certifications, holiday scale plans, defect records, and material tests for a review you had already called optics. Celestine said, That was Bellamont language. Brennan asked, Which part? Celestine did not answer. Priya raised the scorecard. Then why did Armand rank first and still lose to an unwritten criterion? Celestine's voice cooled. Because senior merchandising considers more than visible categories. Valeria replied. Then senior merchandising should have written those categories before inviting suppliers to compete. Brennan looked at Helene. Start with operational exposure. Helene stood. Harbor Line Distribution Hub handles nearly half of our Eastern Region unit volume. During holiday season, it handles a higher share of high-value goods because of its security, climate control, returns inspection, boutique routing, and protective packaging lanes. She changed the slide. Pending requests from Maison Oravel to Armand Coast Logistics include 3 additional packing lanes, 2 early morning dock windows, a climate-controlled overflow zone, and priority handling for winter fragrance and small leather goods. Nolan added, If those are not approved, the most conservative delay model is 12 days. The severe model is 24 days. In a high-demand holiday period, the revenue exposure could reach hundreds of millions. Celestine said, You are assuming Kofi will punish us. Kofi answered, No. They are assuming you cannot use unsigned capacity as if you already own it. Brennan looked at the Harbor Line lease. Good standing condition. Valeria read from the contract. Maintenance of ethical partnership standards, including non-discriminatory supplier engagement, accurate public representation of responsible sourcing, cooperation with review of material incidents, and no retaliation or concealment involving covered vendor relationships. Celestine said, Ethical partnership was designed for labor abuse, not merchandising taste. Valeria said, It covers supplier engagement, truthful sourcing representation, and conduct that could damage Armand by associating our infrastructure with exclusionary procurement. Your company signed it because you wanted to advertise responsible luxury. Morris Clay leaned toward the camera. Responsible luxury should be able to survive reading its own contract. Brennan looked at him. Mr. Clay, you manage operations at Harborline. 32 years in warehouses, 11 under Kofi. You knew Kofi, father? Yes. Jules Armand worked South Wall night shift before this place had clean lights or safe dock equipment. What should this room understand about Harborline? Morris looked past the camera toward the floor. That your brand enters the world through hands you rarely see. A perfume bottle leaves your advertisement as a dream, but it leaves our dock as a temperature-controlled package that somebody scanned, checked, lifted, sealed, and routed. If the people doing that work are invisible to you, then your luxury is blind in one eye. No one interrupted. Morris said, Celestine did not only insult Kofi. She insulted the part of luxury that keeps the promise after the customer pays. Brennan said, The witness will finish. Morris sat back. I am finished, but the dock is not. Brennan turned to Priya. Product assessment. Priya opened her file. Armand Atelier Supply met or exceeded every written technical category in the winter packaging request. Their corner crush test exceeded the current threshold by 18%. Moisture resistance exceeded Bellamont by 22%. Ribbon color variance was below tolerance across all tested samples. Stitch failure on fabric bags was the lowest in the group. She clicked to the next page. Bellamont House packaging showed increased adhesive failure during humidity exposure. Return reports from the last 2 quarters show recurring issues in damaged corners, wrinkled lining, and ribbon mismatch. Celestine said, Bellamont issues were managed. Priya answered, they were renamed. Brennan looked up. What do you mean? Priya showed 3 internal reports. Packaging defect, changed to boutique handling issue. Glue failure, changed to transit exposure. Material source gap, changed to documentation pending. Celestine's face tightened. Those revisions reflected cross-functional review. Helene said, logistics disputed the boutique handling explanation. Priya said, product disputed the ribbon mismatch explanation. Nolan said, finance questioned the rising replacement cost. Brennan stared at Celestine. Were these reports softened before reaching leadership? Celestine answered, we used appropriate executive summary language. Kofi said, that is an elegant way to say yes. Celestine snapped, you are not on our leadership team. Kofi replied, no, I am on the side of the contract you forgot had leverage. Brennan lifted a hand. Enough. He turned to Nolan. Financial comparison. Nolan looked uncomfortable. Long-term cost stability favors Armand Atelier by 6 to 9% after defect replacement and expedited correction costs are included. Bellamont initial unit price is lower, but total landed cost is higher under holiday stress. Brennan asked, why did the summary I received show Bellamont as cost stable? Nolan glanced at Celestine. Because the replacement cost adjustment was removed from the executive summary. By whom? Merchandising review. Brennan looked at Celestine. You removed the cost adjustment. I asked that it be separated from unit pricing, which made Bellamont look cheaper. Celestine replied, unit price is a standard comparison. Imani spoke quietly. So is the cost of fixing failure. The sentence landed cleanly. Valeria asked the legal director to display the vendor note labeled Visual Alignment. Celestine handwriting appeared in scanned form. Bellamont reads Heritage Safe. Armand story risks overcorrecting into social manufacturing narrative. Strong product, wrong face for collection conversation. The room stopped breathing. Wrong face. Priya looked physically hurt. Helene shut her eyes. Brennan looked at Celestine. Explain wrong face. Celestine counsel said, My client will not answer questions about informal notes without review. Valeria said, "Preserve the original." "Already done," the legal director said. Kofi looked at the words. Strong product, wrong face. For the first time in the review, he felt the room from yesterday again. The cream table, the closed folder, the smile that called exclusion taste. Imani saw his hand still on the table. She knew he was angry because he had become very still. Morris muttered, "There it is." Celestine said, "That note is being taken out of context." Kofi looked up, then put it back in context. She did not. He continued, "The context is that we ranked first. You had already reassured Bellamont. Your current supplier had quality problems, and you wrote, strong product, wrong face." Celestine looked away. Brennan said, "Celestine Rourke is suspended from all merchandising, procurement, supplier, and brand partnership authority effective immediately, pending external review." Celestine stood. "You cannot do this based on one phrase." Brennan looked at the screen. "It is not one phrase. It is a pattern with documentation." Celestine turned toward Priya. "You had no right to hand over handwritten notes." Priya flinched. Valeria spoke before Brennan could. "Do not intimidate a witness." Celestine turned toward the screen. "She is my employee." Brennan stood. "Not in this room. In this room, she is a witness in a preserved review." Celestine's mouth tightened. Her counsel whispered to her. This time, she sat. But the damage had already happened. Another sentence had entered the record. "She is my employee." It showed the same instinct as the meeting. A person became smaller when Celestine thought she controlled the room. At 11:40, Brennan ordered an external procurement audit. The scope included Armand Atelier, Bellamont House Packaging, all winter packaging communications, sustainability claim support, cost adjustments, vendor scoring, and any notes containing heritage, visual alignment, brand universe, community manufacturing, supplier image, or face. Celestine whispered, "This will become public," Brennan said. "Then we should finally have records worth defending." At Harborline, Kofi muted the line during the next document transfer. Imani turned to him. "Wrong face." He nodded once. Morris sat beside him. "Your father would be quiet right now, too." Kofi looked at the south wall. "No, my father would be making sure the work stayed clean." That was his mother lesson again. Do not let insult make your hands careless. When the meeting resumed, Brennan had opened the sustainability claim file. Maison Auravel public campaign for winter included the phrase, "responsibly crafted from source to shelf." Valeria highlighted it. If Bellamont has unresolved subcontractor wage concerns and partial material traceability, how does Maison Auravel support this claim? Nolan answered first. "We assumed merchandising had cleared supplier documentation." Helene said, "Logistics never received full traceability from Bellamont." Priya said, "Product requested it twice." Brennan looked at Celestine. "Did Bellamont provide full material traceability?" Celestine said, "Their documentation was in progress." Valeria asked, "Did Armand provide full traceability?" Imani answered, "Batch level and supplier level." Priya confirmed, "Yes." The contrast did its own work. Brennan asked the legal director, "Are our winter claims at risk?" "Yes," the legal director said. "If Bellamont remains and documentation is incomplete, we need revision or substantiation." Celestine said, "You are letting Armand turn this into a public ethics issue?" Brennan replied, "You turned it into an ethics issue when the ethical supplier became the one you excluded." At 1:15, the review moved to witness notes. Helene read from her pre-meeting note, "Do not treat Armand as a minor supplier. Armand Coast controls critical harbor line capacity. Armand Atelier proposal also outperforms current supplier. Recommend fair review and legal awareness before rejection. Brennan asked, "Did you send this to Celestine?" "Yes." Celestine said, "I read it as logistics overreach." Kofi said, "Sometimes overreach is the word people use when truth crosses into their department." Priya then read her product note. Armand sample best aligns with quiet craft direction. Recommend pilot. Concern that rejection on brand fit may conflict with scorecard. Brennan asked, "Did you share this before final rejection?" Priya nodded. Celestine said, "Informally." Priya looked at her. "You told me to leave brand fit to leadership." Celestine said, "Because you lack senior context." Priya answered, "I lacked permission, not context." Another sentence entered the room. "I lacked permission, not context." Kofi watched Brennan write it down. Some organizations did not fail because nobody knew. They failed because the people who knew were trained to wait. At 2:30, Valeria sent the updated good standing conditions. 1. Celestine Rourke, suspension from Covered Procurement Authority, remains active. 2. External procurement audit begins within 48 hours. 3. Bellamont communications and documentation preserved. 4. Supplier criteria must be written, defined, and applied equally. 5. Armand Atelier receives a fair pilot review, not an automatic award. 6. Public responsible sourcing claims must be substantiated before winter launch. 7. Harborline current service continues, but expansion and seasonal priority remain paused until milestones are met. 8. Non-retaliation protection for Priya, Helene, and any employee participating in review. Brennan read the list. Celestine Council objected to the fairness pilot. Kofi responded, "We are not asking to win because Celestine failed. We are asking not to lose because she hid the rules." Brennan said, "That is reasonable." At 3:40, Bellamont Council entered the process. Their first message denied any improper protection arrangement. Their second message asked whether the phrase necessary optics could be understood as informal shorthand rather than evidence of predetermined outcome. Their third message requested permission to update sustainability documentation before production award. Valeria read all three aloud. Imani said, "Now they want to repair the file after the scorecard." Morris said, "They want to sew the seam after the bag is sold." Kofi looked at the message. "No retroactive repair in the comparison set. Any new documentation must be labeled after review notice." Valeria smiled slightly. "Already drafted." At 4:10, the external procurement firm was selected. At 4:30, Celestine was escorted from the merchandising floor by legal process. Her laptop was imaged. Her work phone was collected. Her vendor files were sealed. Her handwritten notebook was scanned. She walked past the glass display of winter handbags and did not look at them. Priya watched from her desk. Helene stood beside her. Priya asked, "Is it wrong that I still feel afraid?" Helene answered, "No, fear does not mean you were wrong. It means the room trained you well." Priya looked at the scorecard in her hand. "Then I want to be trained differently." At Harborline, the day shift ended. Morris gathered the floor supervisors. "Current service continues," he told them. "No retaliation against Maison store staff. No shortcuts. No gossip on the packing floor. We document every request, every exception, every delay, every client pressure." A supervisor asked, "Are we losing the account?" Kofi answered from the doorway, "Not today." Another asked, "Are they losing priority? They have to earn it again." The workers understood that. Most of them had spent years earning trust. One scan, one pallet, one route, one night shift at a time. At 5:20, Brennan sent a formal response to Armand Coast. Maison Aurivel agrees to preservation conditions, external procurement audit, non-retaliation terms, and defined supplier criteria. Current Harbor Line services will continue under existing agreement. Expansion and priority requests remain pending until good standing milestones are satisfied. At the end, he added one sentence not drafted by legal. We cannot call ourselves a house of craftsmanship while refusing to respect the people who bring craftsmanship into the room. Kofi read it twice. Imani asked, "Do you believe him?" "I believe the sentence. That is not what I asked." "I know," Morris chuckled. "That is a supplier answer." Kofi closed the message. "No, it is a warehouse answer. Trust the shipment after inspection, not after promise." The screen in the Harbor Line conference room refreshed. A new file appeared from Maison Aurivel. Bellamont House Packaging Preliminary Documentation Archive. Valeria opened it. Inside were expired sustainability certificates, missing subcontractor wage attestations, unresolved adhesive complaints, and a note from Bellamont to Celestine that read, "If Armand becomes visible in the process, it may complicate the heritage story we built together." The room went quiet. Imani looked at Kofi. They were not only protecting Bellamont. Kofi nodded. They were protecting a story. Valeria said, "Then the next stage of this review is the story itself." Morris looked through the glass at the shipping floor. "And stories can be audited too." Kofi turned back to the file. The vendor Celestine said fit the brand was beginning to look weaker with every document opened. And the supplier, she said, did not fit, was still the one keeping the brand moving through the night. At Harbor Line Distribution Hub, the night shift did not care about Celestine Rourke pride. It cared about scan accuracy, temperature readings, dock timing, seal integrity, route sequence, package condition. Kofi Armand walked the floor with Morris Clay and Imani Cross, while Valeria Quinn reviewed the Bellamont archive upstairs. No one was told to slow Maison Aurivel freight. No one was told to punish a boutique. No one was told to let a box sit open because a woman in a marble room had said the wrong thing. That was the difference between revenge and standards. Revenge makes innocent hands pay. Standards make the record answer. Upstairs, Valeria opened the next file from Bellamont House Packaging, Winter Heritage Narrative Deck. The first slide showed old stone, soft light, and a workshop that looked built for a brochure more than an audit. The third slide carried a note from Celestine. Keep supplier story quiet. Customer should feel lineage, not labor. Valeria copied the note into the preservation log. Kofi returned in time to read it. Lineage, not labor. He said it once. Imani stood behind him. That is the whole thing. Valeria opened another note. Armand proposal may force conversation toward worker visibility and supply chain ethics. Strong execution, but risks changing the customer dream. Morris leaned on the chair. Changing the dream. That is what they call waking up. The video review with Maison Aurivel resumed at 8 in the morning. This time, the room looked different. Brennan began. Today we are reviewing the story Maison Aurivel used to justify a supplier decision. Not the marketing story, the documented story. Celestine said, "That phrasing is prejudicial." Brennan looked at her. "Your note says, keep supplier story quiet. Customer should feel lineage, not labor. We are going to understand what that meant." Her counsel objected. The objection was noted. The note remained. The outside procurement auditor, Sabine Holt, spoke first. We compared written supplier criteria against the actual decision record. Armand Atelier Supply was the highest rated candidate on measurable criteria. Bellamont House packaging was lower on quality stability, material traceability, labor documentation, and total landed cost after defect correction. We found no written criterion that supports rejection of Armand on the phrase brand universe. Celestine said, "Senior brand judgment is part of luxury procurement." Sabine answered, "It can be, but if it overrides every written score without definition, it becomes an unscored veto." Unscored veto. It was exactly what Celestine had built, a private door behind a public competition. Brennan asked, "Did the process tell suppliers that senior brand judgment could override all measurable criteria?" Sabine answered, "No." "Did it define brand fit?" "No." "Did it define heritage alignment?" "No." "Did it explain that community manufacturing, worker visibility, or industrial origin could count against a supplier?" "No." Kofi did not need to speak. Every no was a nail in the hidden door. Priya opened the product defect file. The first slide showed Bellamont packaging issues across 2 quarters. Soft corners, ribbon mismatch, adhesive separation, wrinkled inner lining, inconsistent blue dye, moisture damage on outer cartons. Then she showed boutique comments. Box arrived dented. Ribbon color not matching display sample. Perfume sleeve lifted at seam. Gift packaging felt less premium than expected. Priya turned to Brennan. These were attributed to boutique handling or transit exposure. But the defect photos show material and adhesive weaknesses. Helene added, "Logistics disputed the boutique handling explanation." Nolan said, "Replacement cost increased by 12% in the last 2 quarters." Brennan looked at Celestine. "Why did your executive summary say Bellamont remains stable?" Kofi spoke. "They did not rise because people below you kept catching them." The room turned toward him. A box arrived soft. A hub worker replaced it. A ribbon did not match. A boutique employee corrected the display. A seam lifted. A warehouse supervisor stopped the shipment. Failure can look stable when invisible people absorb the cost. Morris nodded. "That is the warehouse truth." Brennan looked at Morris. "Mr. Clay, say more." Morris leaned forward. "When leadership says a supplier is stable, they often mean the customer did not see the failure. But somebody saw it. Somebody stayed late. Somebody reboxed. Somebody called a driver. Somebody moved freight to a safer lane. Somebody wrote a note that got renamed. If those people are never counted, bad vendors look better than they are." Kofi added, "And good vendors look less necessary than they are." Celestine looked down. For the first time, she did not interrupt Morris. Sabine moved to the next document. Bellamont Sustainability Certificate, expiring. Subcontractor wage attestation, incomplete. Material origin documentation, partial. Corrective action log, open. Armand Atelier file, current certificates. Complete subcontractor disclosures. Batch-level material trail. Fair wage verification. Complete corrective action history. Sabine said, on responsible sourcing, Armand had stronger support than Bellamont at the time of decision. Valeria asked, "Did Maison Aurivel's winter campaign rely on responsible sourcing language?" Brennan answered, "Yes." "Could that claim be supported by Bellamont alone?" The legal director answered, "Not without revision or additional documentation." Celestine said, "We were still collecting documents." Imani said, "From the supplier you wanted to protect after rejecting the supplier who already had them." At 10:15, Sabine opened the communication timeline. 6 months earlier, Armand Atelier invited to submit winter packaging proposal. 5 months earlier, Armand submits material and labor files. 4 months earlier, Bellamont tells Celestine that Armand's story could complicate heritage positioning. 3 months earlier, Helene warns Celestine that Armand Coast controls harborline capacity. 2 months earlier, Priya notes Armand samples outperform current supplier. 3 weeks earlier, Nolan model shows Bellamont total landed cost higher after correction expenses. 1 week earlier, Celestine writes, other review necessary optics. Day of meeting. Celestine rejects Armand on brand fit. Day after meeting. Celestine tells Bellamont, delete informal language. Sabine looked at Brennan. This timeline supports a concern that the outcome was influenced before the meeting and that the meeting functioned partly as procedural cover. Celestine said, I reject that. Valeria replied, you may reject the characterization. The timeline remains. Brennan asked Celestine one question. Did Armand ever have a fair path to win this supplier review? Her counsel whispered. Celestine said nothing. Brennan asked again. Did they? Celestine stared at the table. Finally, she said, Bellamont was more aligned with the brand direction already established. Kofi leaned closer to the camera. That was not my question yesterday, but it answers it today. Celestine looked up. Kofi continued, we were not rejected because we failed the criteria. We were rejected because the decision had already been dressed before we entered the room. Priya looked at the scorecard. Dressed like heritage, Helene added, protected like dependency. The authority in the room shifted again, not toward Kofi personally, toward the record. At 11:30, Brennan announced immediate actions. Bellamont House packaging was removed from automatic renewal consideration pending documentation review. The winter packaging decision was reopened under external procurement supervision. Armand Atelier Supply would receive a structured pilot with measurable quality, cost, sourcing, and delivery criteria published in advance. The phrase brand fit could not be used unless defined in writing and tied to product-facing requirements rather than supplier identity. Celestine Rourke remained suspended from supplier decisions. All communications with Bellamont and Armand would be preserved. All public responsible sourcing claims would be reviewed before launch. Celestine made the mistake powerful people often make when the record begins to turn. She tried to make consequence sound like victimhood. So Maison Aurivel is now allowing a logistics vendor to dictate brand identity. Kofi looked at her for a long second. No. Maison Aurivel is finally allowing evidence to interrupt prejudice. She looked at Brennan. Are you going to let him speak to me like that? Brennan answered, he is more precise than you have been. Celestine, mouth closed. That sentence did not shout. It removed her room. At noon, the call paused. Kofi walked the floor again. Morris joined him near the old south wall. You kept your temper. Kofi looked at the brick. I almost did not. When she said logistics vendor? Yes. Morris looked toward the packing lanes. That is what people call the floor when they want the floor to stay below them. Kofi touched the wall. My father used to say, the warehouse is where promises become either true or false. Morris nodded. He said that because he loaded promises for people who never thanked him. Kofi remembered his father sitting at the kitchen table after refusing to load damaged goods that a supervisor wanted shipped anyway. They sell trust upstairs, Jules had said. We have to protect it downstairs, even when they do not know who we are. Kofi had spent years turning that sentence into a company. Now, Maison Aurivel was learning what happened when upstairs forgot downstairs had ownership. At 1:15, the review resumed with hub testimony.
Morris presented 3 incidents where Harborline workers had protected Maison Aurivel goods beyond contract minimum. A storm reroute that saved fragrance shipments from heat exposure. A night shift repacking operation that prevented damaged gift boxes from reaching flagship stores.
A counterfeit return detection process that stopped high-value goods from re-entering boutique inventory. In each case, Harborline had filed incident reports. In each case, Maison Aurivel executive summaries reduced the work to operational support. Morris said, "Operational support is a small phrase for people who stayed all night." Helene looked at Brennan. He is right. We minimized the hub in leadership reports because the brand story centered boutique experience. Kofi said, "Boutique experience begins before the boutique." The review became more than a procurement case. It became a map of invisibility. Who got named? Who got erased? Who was praised? Who was assumed? At 2, Valeria introduced the ethical partnership clause again. Armand Coast Logistics is not asserting that Maison Aurivel must choose Armand Atelier Supply. The contract does not require that.
It requires a fair process, non-discriminatory standards, truthful sourcing claims, and respect for covered supplier relationships. The remedy we seek is not automatic award. It is structural correction. Brennan said, "Understood." Celestine said, "If this is not about forcing the award, then why freeze expansion?" Valeria answered, "Because expansion is not owed to a partner whose review process may violate good standing. You keep current service. You do not receive additional priority until the review shows you can use it responsibly." Morris whispered, "That is called earning the dock." Brennan heard him. Perhaps we should have been earning it all along. At 3:10, Sabine opened confidential employee statements. A junior coordinator said Celestine often described suppliers with phrases like showroom safe, visually consistent, and customer familiar. A former procurement analyst said vendors from non-traditional ownership backgrounds were often told they needed more story refinement, even when quality was strong. A packaging engineer said Bellamont problems were treated as fixable because they fit the brand, while smaller, diverse suppliers had to be perfect to stay in the process. Priya closed her eyes. That last sentence hurt because it was true. Smaller, diverse suppliers had to be perfect. Bellamont only had to be familiar. Kofi finally spoke. "That is the standard we came to challenge." Brennan asked, "Which standard? The one where some suppliers are allowed to improve while others are asked to prove they belong before the first defect?" At 4, Brennan asked Kofi directly, "Do you still want Armand Atelier considered for the winter collection?" Kofi looked at Amani. She nodded once. "Yes," Kofi said. "Even after this. Especially after this." Why? Because if we walk away, Bellamont remains proof that a familiar story can survive weak data. If we stay, the process must show whether quality can beat image when the rules are finally visible. Brennan nodded. "Then the pilot will proceed." Valeria said, "Under external supervision." "Yes." Imani said, "With written criteria." "Yes." Helene said, "With logistics review included before final award." "Yes." Priya said, "With product notes preserved." "Yes." Morris said, "With warehouse incident costs counted." Brennan looked at him. "Yes." Celestine stared at the table. The brand universe had lost gravity. At 4:30, the pilot terms were drafted. Armand Atelier would produce a controlled run for the winter gift set. Bellamont would produce a comparable run from current specifications. Both would be tested for defect rate, moisture resistance, corner integrity, ribbon color stability, customer presentation, material traceability, labor compliance, cost after correction, and hub handling efficiency.
The samples would be blind reviewed by product and logistics teams. Supplier identity would not be visible during quality scoring. Brand story would be assessed separately, only after product performance. Celestine objected. You cannot blind review luxury packaging. Context matters. Sabine answered, product quality can survive the absence of supplier biography. Imani added, unless biography was the point all along. Celestine did not reply. Kofi watched Alana, one of the senior seam inspectors, check the fabric bag tension. She held up a bag that looked almost perfect. This one fails. A visiting Maison Aureville product analyst asked, why? Alana pointed to a faint stress line near the corner. Alana answered without looking up. The point is that they never have to. The analyst wrote that down. Later, that sentence would appear in the final review. It was the best definition of luxury anyone had given all week. At 6, Celestine requested to address Brennan privately. He refused a private conversation and offered a recorded meeting with counsel. She accepted because she had no other room left. On the recording, she said, I regret that my language created misunderstanding. Brennan asked, which language? Brand fit. He waited. She added, wrong face, and necessary optics, and delete informal language. Brennan looked at her. That is not misunderstanding. That is the vocabulary of exclusion, predetermined process, and concealment. Celestine's face hardened. After 20 years protecting this house, I will not be reduced to one vendor dispute. Brennan answered, you are not being reduced. You are being measured. The sentence landed like a final stamp. At the bottom of the internal update, Brennan added a line approved by legal. No supplier will be rejected under undefined image criteria when measurable performance, ethical documentation, and operational evidence say otherwise. Kofi read the line at Harbor Line. Imani asked, is that enough? No. Morris laughed. You ever say yes to anything? Kofi looked through the glass at the floor. Yes, when the work is done. That night, the first blind pilot samples were sealed in plain white cases. No supplier names, no heritage deck, no founder story, no community narrative, no European village photograph, no industrial origin, just materials, seams, corners, ribbons, linings, adhesive, traceability, and handling results waiting to be tested. For the first time, the packaging would enter Maison Aureville without a face for Celestine to judge. It would arrive as craft, and craft, unlike brand fit, could be measured. The blind pilot cases reached Maison Aureville before sunrise. No supplier names, no founder biographies, no heritage photographs, no story cards, only sample codes, production lot numbers, handling instructions, and sealed documentation packets held by the outside procurement auditor. For the first time, the boxes could not be judged by the face of the person who made them. They could only be judged by how well they did the job. Priya Malin stood with Sabine Holt, Helene Savoy, 2 product engineers, 1 finance observer, and 1 logistics analyst inside the testing room. Celestine Rourke was not allowed to attend. She had tried to argue that removing senior brand perspective would damage the emotional reading of the product. Sabine had answered with 1 sentence. Quality should survive the absence of prejudice. The first sample entered the corner pressure test, then the moisture chamber, then the ribbon tension test, then the lining friction test, then the boutique presentation review. The observers filled out forms without knowing which supplier they were scoring. 1 box held shape after pressure, 1 corner softened,
One ribbon shifted color under warm display light. One fabric bag showed stress at the seam. One liner remained smooth after handling. One adhesive lifted at the edge. The room stayed quiet because nobody wanted to guess. Guessing had already cost Maison Aureville too much. At Harborline Distribution Hub, Kofi Armand watched the test feed from the conference room with Imani Cross and Morris Clay. Kofi did not smile when the first strong score appeared. Imani noticed. "You are not going to let yourself enjoy even 1 point." Kofi kept his eyes on the screen. A fair test is not a favor. No, but we are winning the fair test. We are performing well in the fair test. Morris laughed under his breath. That is the most warehouse answer I have ever heard. Kofi looked through the glass at the packing lanes. The floor was already moving Maison Aureville freight through current service. No one had missed a truck. No one had lost a package. No one had let anger become a delay disguised as justice. That mattered to him. His father had once said, "The dock shows a man character because boxes cannot tell the difference between discipline and bitterness. They only show whether the work was done right." At 10:20, Sabine released the blind results. Sample Group A outperformed Sample Group B in corner strength, moisture resistance, ribbon stability, material traceability, labor documentation, and cost after correction. Sample Group A was Armand Atelier Supply. Bellamont House Packaging ranked below Armand in every category except initial unit price. When replacement cost, late shipment risk, and documentation gaps were included, even that advantage disappeared. Brennan Locke read the results twice. Then he looked at the executive team. "The measurable case is clear," Helene said. "The operational case is clear." Priya said, "The product case is clear." Nolan Pierce added, "The financial case is clear when defects are counted honestly." Brennan turned to the legal director. "The ethical sourcing claim," the legal director answered. "Stronger with Armand. We would still need careful language, but their documentation supports the winter campaign better than Bellamont current file." Brennan nodded. "Then we award the winter packaging pilot to Armand Atelier Supply and begin transition planning." Celestine Counsel requested to read a statement on her behalf. Brennan allowed it. The statement said Celestine had always acted in defense of Maison Aureville's heritage. It said her words had been misunderstood, her notes taken out of context, and her concern about brand universe misrepresented as bias. It said she regretted any discomfort caused to Kofi Armand and his team. Kofi read the statement on the conference screen. Discomfort. Imani whispered the word with disgust. Morris crossed his arms. That is what people call a cut when they do not want to admit who held the knife. Kofi did not respond publicly. Brennan did. This review does not find that Celestine Rourke caused discomfort. It finds that she used undefined brand criteria to override measurable performance, protected a preferred supplier despite documented weakness, attempted to control communications after preservation began, and made supplier judgments that were inconsistent with Maison Aureville ethical partnership standards. He looked at the legal director. Proceed with termination review. Celestine was not in the room when her authority ended. That was fitting. For years, she had ended other people opportunities in rooms where they had no power. Now the room moved without her. By noon, Maison Aureville issued internal actions. Celestine Rourke removed from her executive role. Bellamont House Packaging automatic renewal canceled. Winter packaging pilot awarded to Armand Atelier Supply under external supervision. All supplier selection criteria to be rewritten and published internally. Brand fit banned as a standalone rejection reason.
All responsible sourcing claims to require documented support. All procurement staff to receive training on measurable criteria, supplier dignity, and bias hidden inside aesthetic language. Prior supplier rejections to be sampled for review. Helene Savoy given independent authority to escalate logistics risks directly to the Chief Executive Officer. Priya Malin protected from retaliation and promoted into the Supplier Review Task Group. Maison Aurivel also accepted Armand Coast conditions for good standing. Current Harbor Line service would continue. Expansion priority would return only after milestones were met. The dock would not be a prize for apology. It would be earned through changed behavior. At 3, Kofi joined the implementation call. Brennan appeared tired, but the performance had gone out of him. "Mr. Armand," Brennan said, "Maison Aurivel accepts the pilot award and the good standing milestones. I also want to say directly that what happened in that room was wrong." Kofi looked at him.
Wrong because it endangered your distribution, or wrong because it happened before you knew what I controlled? Brennan did not answer quickly. Good, Kofi thought. Fast answers often hide more than they reveal. Brennan finally said, "Both were wrong, but only one answer matters. It was wrong before we knew what you controlled." Kofi studied him. "Then prove that in the process for the next supplier who controls nothing you need." Brennan nodded. "That is fair. It is necessary." Valeria Quinn read the final milestones: transparent vendor criteria, external audit of prior rejections, supplier complaint channel, no retaliation, responsible sourcing documentation, warehouse labor visibility in campaign claims, formal recognition of Harbor Line operational role, payment for extra review work caused by Maison Aurivel procurement failure. Brennan accepted each one. Then he asked, "What about the public story?" Kofi said, "Tell the truth without making my company your redemption advertisement." Brennan looked up. "Explain. Do not turn the supplier you insulted into proof that you are always inclusive. Do not put our workers in a campaign as decoration. Do not sell humility in gold letters. Say you changed because your process failed. Then show the process." Helene smiled faintly. "That may be the best public communications advice we have received." Kofi said, "It is not advice, it is a condition." The final pilot began the next week. Armand Atelier did not rush. Imani refused to let the team treat the contract like a victory lap. She gathered the workshop leads around the first Maison Aurivel production schedule. "We are not making these boxes to prove Celestine wrong," a supervisor asked. "Then what are we proving?" "That our standard survives pressure." The team understood. Fabric bags were stitched and stress tested. Boxes were folded and pressure checked. Ribbon color was compared under display light. Linings were rubbed, cooled, warmed, and handled. Every batch had origin documentation. Every corrective action had a name and timestamp. No one hid a flaw because the story had become important. If anything, the story made them stricter. Kofi walked the floor late one evening and saw a young worker named Sela reject a box that looked perfect from a distance. He asked, "What did you see?" She pointed to one corner. "It will soften after shipping. Most customers would not notice." "Then it is not for most customers. It is for our standard." Kofi smiled. That was luxury, not exclusion, not old names, not marble rooms. A worker caring about the part nobody else had noticed yet. At Harbor Line, the first Armand Atelier shipment entered the Maison Aurivel lane. Morris watched the scans. Inbound packaging lot verified. Material trace complete. Labor documentation complete. Temperature exposure normal. Handling damage none. Morris looked at the screen. "Your mother would have liked that."
Kofi stood beside him. She would have checked the seam anyway. And your father? He would have asked whether the people on the line got their break. Morris nodded. They did. Then he would have liked it too. Months passed. The winter collection launched with Armand Atelier packaging. Maison Aurevel did not use Kofi's face in the campaign. It did not make a heroic advertisement about learning respect. Under Kofi conditions, the public sourcing page changed in quieter, stronger ways. It named material sources. It named the manufacturing region. It named labor standards. It named Harbor Line Distribution Hub as a logistics and quality handling partner. It explained how packaging was tested, handled, stored, and protected. It removed vague claims that could not be supported. Some luxury commentators called the new transparency unromantic. Customers disagreed. Boutique associates reported that clients liked knowing the packaging had a real origin. Returns tied to packaging damage dropped. Holiday shipment delays decreased. Replacement costs fell. The winter gift set became one of Maison Aurevel's most stable seasonal launches in 5 years. Not because the story became prettier, because the system became truer. The external procurement audit finished in spring. It found that undefined aesthetic criteria had been used in multiple past supplier decisions. It did not claim every decision was discriminatory. It did not need to. The pattern was clear enough to require repair. Maison Aurevel reopened several vendor categories. It invited suppliers to request score feedback. It created a written rule. No supplier may be rejected under image, heritage, alignment, universe, or customer expectation language unless the criterion is written in advance, tied to the product or service, and applied equally. Priya helped write that rule. Helene insisted logistics input be included before any supplier decision that affected capacity, handling, timing, packaging condition, or claims about sustainability. Nolan built total failure cost into supplier comparisons. Morris trained Maison Aurevel executives on warehouse incident reporting. He began the session with one line: "If your brand survives because someone fixed the problem before the customer saw it, that person is part of the brand." Some executives were uncomfortable. Morris liked that. Discomfort meant the sentence had entered the right place. Celestine never returned to Maison Aurevel. Her professional statement said she had chosen to pursue advisory work in heritage brand strategy. The industry heard the other version. She had lost authority because she mistook bias for taste, familiarity for quality, and image for luxury. Months later, she sent Kofi a private letter. This time, it did not say discomfort. It said, "I did not see your company because I had already decided what kind of person should represent our brand." Kofi read it in his office at Harbor Line. Imani asked, "Is that an apology?" "It is closer." "Will you answer?" "No." "Why?" "Because her understanding is not mine to manage." He placed the letter in the archive, not the wall, the archive. Records mattered, but not every record deserved display. 1 year after the review, Harbor Line hosted a student visit for public school students from the Old Port District. Morris led the first half. He showed them inbound scanning, climate-controlled storage, quality inspection, boutique routing, and high-value handling. He told them that a warehouse was not a place where products waited. It was a place where promises were tested. Then Kofi took them into the Armand Atelier workshop. The students watched workers stitch fabric bags, fold rigid boxes, inspect ribbons, and reject anything that failed the standard. A girl named Nia raised her hand. "Do luxury brands let people like us own part of the process now?" Kofi smiled. "They do not let you. You build so well that letting you becomes the wrong word." She frowned. "Then what is the right word?" "They recognize what you already made real." A boy asked,
Did Maison Orivel only respect you because they needed your warehouse? Kofi did not soften the answer. At first, yes. The students went quiet. Then he said, "That is why the work could not stop at getting respect for me. If a system only respects the person with leverage, it has not learned dignity, it has learned fear. We had to change the rules for the supplier who walks in with great work and no hidden power behind them." Nia looked at the inspection table. Can packaging be justice? Kofi thought of his mother under the lamp, his father on the dock, Celestine closing the file, and the first blind sample entering the testing room without a face. Packaging can be proof, he said.
Justice is what people do after proof becomes impossible to ignore. Later that afternoon, Maison Orivel unveiled the permanent supplier wall in its North America office. It did not show glamorous portraits. It showed the chain, material source, workshop, quality inspection, distribution hub, driver handoff, boutique receipt, customer delivery. Every link had names of teams, not only executives. At the bottom was a sentence Brennan had asked Kofi permission to use. Craftsmanship has no color. Respect belongs in every link of the chain. Kofi had said yes on one condition. The sentence could not stand alone. Beside it, Maison Orivel had to display the current supplier selection rules and the annual audit summary. A quote without accountability was decoration. A rule with data could become culture. Brennan accepted. At sunset, Kofi returned to Harbor Line. The day shift was ending. A line of trucks waited at the outbound gate. A worker scanned the last Maison Orivel shipment. The label printed clean. The box was square. The ribbon held. The route was on time. Morris stood beside Kofi. A year ago, Celestine would have said this place was too close to the machinery of luxury. Kofi watched the truck doors close. There is no luxury without the machinery. Morris looked at him. Your father knew that. My mother too. He took one fabric bag from the inspection table. It had failed because of a small stitch tension issue, almost invisible. Kofi ran his thumb along the seam. The person who carries it will feel whether I cared. Morris said, You still hear her. Every day. The truck pulled away. Kofi watched it move through the gate his company owned, carrying goods for a brand that had learned the hard way that image could not move freight, fix defects, protect workers, or make a weak supplier strong. Celestine Rourke had thought she was only refusing a black supplier who did not match her fantasy of old-world refinement. She looked at Kofi Armand and saw the port, the warehouse, the workers, the community, the labor, and the truth she wanted hidden behind softer lighting. She did not see luxury. But 1 hour later, when Maison Orivel opened the Harbor Line file, it discovered that the man she rejected was not outside the brand. He was beneath it, around it, behind it, moving it, protecting it, improving it, keeping it honest when its own leaders preferred a prettier lie. Kofi did not destroy their supply chain to prove power. He did something harder. He kept the chain moving while forcing every link to be named. He made the scorecard matter. He made the contract matter. He made the warehouse matter. He made the workers matter. He made Maison Orivel answer a question that every luxury brand tries to avoid. What is elegance worth if it depends on people you refuse to respect? The answer did not come from Celestine. It came from the work, from the box that held its corners, from the ribbon that stayed true, from the worker who rejected a hidden flaw, from the driver whose route left on time, from the hub that kept its standards even while under insult, from the supplier who did not ask to be included as charity,
but demanded to be measured by truth. Luxury was never the art of keeping certain people outside the room. Luxury was the discipline of caring so deeply about the work that even the unseen parts carried dignity. And from that year on, at the entrance of Harbor Line Distribution Hub, every visitor passed a line carved into dark steel. Craftsmanship has no color. Respect belongs in every link of the chain. Below it, in smaller letters, was the rule Kofi had added himself. If the work is excellent, open the file before you judge the face across the table.